Hi everyone, it's Evangeline here at etrailer, and today we'll be taking a look at our RockyMounts MonoRail 2-bike platform rack right here on our 2015 GMC Yukon. So this is going to be a platform rack that stays affordable but also checks off all the boxes in terms of great weight capacity for even those heavy electric bikes, as well as the capacity for your fat bikes, as well as your carbon fiber frame bikes. So we'll talk about those features and specs, but we're going to focus on our Yukon today. That way you can see what is the better fit for you, your different types of bikes, and your vehicle. So this has a 60-pound weight capacity for your extra heavy bikes. And we have another feature here where this bike rack can tilt the weight even with the bikes on. So let's take a look at that. We have this bright blue lever here, so pull that lever and then just let that rack drop down to a tilt. You'll want to be careful if you do have that fully loaded up with all of your bikes. But why would you tilt your rack away? Well, if you do want to access your hatch. Now, the Yukon has a big door, so notice how close it gets to our pedals and our handlebars. Definitely still clearance there. In fact, we have about 3-4 inches of clearance before it hits our handlebars and our pedals, but still plenty of space to grab whatever we need, whether it's our bags, our helmets, our waters. And once the door is closed, you just lift up on the rack and it snaps into place. So I talked about how this can carry heavy electric bikes, but as you can see here, we have a carbon fiber frame bike. Perfectly fine because of the way it's tied down. So in the back, we have a rear wheel strap securing the rear wheel, and in the front is my favorite part. It's going to be our front wheel mount. And I like pretty much any bike rack that has a front wheel mount because depending on your different frames, whether you have a carbon fiber frame, you have a step-through frame, women's frame, children's frame, perfectly fine because it holds it up by the front wheel. Also, it makes it easy to install. Now, when we want to take the bike off, we start at the rear wheel strap. You press that blue lever, and then this will allow you to disengage the strap. So that goes up, and I try to secure it over to the side so it doesn't get caught up in our spokes as we take the rack off, or the bike off. Now hold on to your frame as you press this blue button and lift this front wheel mount out and push it over there. And from here, it's just a slight lift and you're ready to go on a bike ride. In the front, we have our front wheel cradle. This comes up to help support your front wheel, and then it folds down to be all nice and neat. Then we have that front wheel mount, which I talked about. You have that little groove in there for your wheels. This ratchets down to secure that front wheel. I actually like to put it over here to the side of our rear cradle. Look at that rear cradle. So this tilts back and forth to accommodate those different wheelbases with a maximum wheelbase of 48 inches. You have those grooves on the inside for your thin road bike tires or your wider fat bike tires with a maximum tire width of 5 inches. And then that strap goes around that rear wheel and secures it right there. So with your bikes off, you can obviously lift up your door, but this is also going to add some length to the back of your Yukon. So we're going to take some measurements to see exactly how much. I'm going to measure from our bumper here to the end of the front wheel mount, and that's 34 inches of length. So still pretty normal for a 2-bike platform rack. Still a measurement to keep in mind since you already have a really big vehicle as you're backing into your garage or parking into a tight spot. Don't forget that you have a bike rack as well as bikes behind you, and you can extend this rack with the RockyMounts MonoRail add-on to up to 3 bikes. Now let's talk about ground clearance. And for other vehicles, they want to know ground clearance when they go up those steep inclines so their bikes don't hit the ground. In our case here, there's a lot of ground clearance, so that's not the issue, but there's something else you might want to consider. And as we go to that, let's talk about how the shank sits 23 inches up off the ground. Then we have a shank rise here of 31.25 inches. But since this has a 60-pound weight capacity, remember, you're going to have to be lifting those heavy electric bikes 34 inches up off the ground. So that's something worth considering, especially if you're on the short side like me, or if you have noodle arms like me. If that's going to be a big issue for you, you may want to check out some of our bike racks that have ramps. The Yakima on-ramp might be a better option for you in that case. Now, what if you're not planning on going out for a bike ride just yet, but you also don't want to take your bike rack off? What you can do is fold it up into the compact or portable position. We have this bright blue lever that we pulled earlier. Pull it in again, but this time lift up on the rack and it should just snap into place right there. Let's take some measurements. Measuring for closest point, that's going to be from our bumper to our cradle, 4 inches, so plenty of clearance there. Length now added to the back of our Yukon is going to be bumper to that end of the shank, 14 3/4 inches. So this is going to be helpful for when you're just driving around town. You don't want to take up too much space, but what is it like living with a bike rack behind you all the time? Well, notice with it folded up like this, it obviously doesn't cover your rear window or your taillights. Does kind of cover your license plate though, and your backup camera sits right there, right in the gap between your front wheel mount and your frame. So you still are kind of going to be able to see the vehicles behind you, but if that's going to be a big deal, just go ahead and ride with this in a downwards position. Now this has a 2-inch shank that fits into our 2-inch hitch receiver. There is a version of the monorail with an 1.25 inch shank that's going to be limited in terms of weight capacity, by the way. So make sure to get the 2-inch shank straight off the bat. So that fits into that receiver, has an anti-rattle bolt and a lock. You're also going to get another lock on this side for the cable lock included with your rack. Don't worry, they're key to like, use one key for the whole system. This anti-rattle bolt uses a 3/4 inch socket or a wrench. We have extras here at eTrailer if you want to pick one up separately to keep in your vehicle. But with that tightened down, it creates an anti-rattle experience. So to demonstrate, I'm going to shake our bike rack back and forth just to simulate that road movement and vibration. I'm really just moving the vehicle at this point. That's because that connection right there is nice and secure, making for a smoother ride for your bikes overall. This is a really solid rack. In fact, this is what I tend to borrow all the time when I need to carry a bike real quick from point A to point B. It checks off all the boxes. Whether you have a carbon fiber frame, an electric bike, a women's bike, a step-through bike, it can carry those. Now, some points is going to be using the cable lock as well as using the hitch lock. You're going to have to remember they're 2 different locks. If you want a rack that does pretty much the same thing but slightly better, you may want to check out the Kuat NV. That's a more premium rack with smoother movements. This one is still though a solid, sturdy bike rack, and then you can add it on as your family expands or as you bring more people in your Yukon. And that right there was a look at our RockyMounts MonoRail 2-bike platform rack on our 2015 GMC Yukon.